બોલો બોલો.
કૃષ્ણ કૃષ્ણ હરે
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, everybody. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Welcome devotees to our evening Bhagavad Gita circle reading program. Tonight we will be continuing with chapter 13, verse 6 and on. And the chapter is entitled The Nature, Enjoyer, and Consciousness. And it will be read and explained to us by Parikshit Prabhu from ISKCON Harrisburg. Without further delay, we will go right into the verses. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namini. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirveshesha Sunyavari Paschatya Shatarini. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shiva Shadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Damn. Good afternoon, dear devotees. So Srimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer and Consciousness, texts 6 and 7. Mahabhutanya hankaro bhuti abhyaktam evacha indriyani dashaikam cha pancha chendriya gochara ichcha dvesha sukam dukkam sangata chetanadriti etat shetam samasena savikaram udahritam. Translation by His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The five great elements, false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses in the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions, all these are considered, in summary, to be the field of activities and its interactions. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. From all the authoritative statements of the great sages, the Vedic hymns, and the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra, the components of this world can be understood as follows. First, there are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. These are the 5 great elements, Mahabhuta. Then there are false ego, intelligence, and the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of nature. Then there are 5 senses for acquiring knowledge, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Then 5 working senses, voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals. Then above the senses, there is a mind, which is within and which can be called the sense within. Therefore, including the mind, there are 11 senses altogether. Then there are 5 objects of the senses. The 5 objects of the senses are smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Now, the aggregate of these 24 elements is called the field of activity. If one makes an analytical study of these 24 subjects, then he can very well understand the field of activity. Then there are desire, hatred, happiness, and distress, which are interactions, representations of the 5 great elements in the gross body. The living symptoms represented by consciousness and convictions are the manifestations of the subtle body, mind, ego, and intelligence. These subtle elements are included within the field of activities. The 5 great elements are a gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal state of false ego, technically called the materialistic conception or tamas buddhi, intelligence in ignorance. This further represents the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of material nature. The unmanifested modes of material nature are called pradhan. One who desires to know the 24 elements in detail along with their interactions should study the philosophy in more detail. In Bhagavad Gita, a summary is only given. A summary only is given. The body is a representation of all these factors, and there are changes of the body, which are 6 in number. The body is born, it grows, it stays, it produces byproducts, then it begins to decay, and at the last stage, it vanishes. Therefore, the field is a non-permanent material thing. However, the Kshetriyagya, the knower of the field, its proprietor, is different. Text 8 through 12. Amanidvam adambitvam ahimsa shantir ajavam acharyo pasanam socham stairam atma vinigraha indriyate suvairagyam anahankara evacha janma mityu jara vyadi dukkha dosha nudashanam ashaktir anabishvanga putra dhara grihadishu nityam cha samachittatvam istanisto papadishu Mai chananya yogena bhaktir abhya vicharini vivikta desha sevitvam arati jana samsadi adhyatma jana nityadvam tattva gyan natadashanam etat gyanam iti proktam agyanam yat atonyata. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from the entanglement with the children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever they may be, is ignorance. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described above. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. The embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is a casing made of the 24 elements. And the process of knowledge as described here is the means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Mayi chanyana yogena bhaktir ana abhyabhicharini. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. But if one takes to devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. As stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 18, Text 12, Yashyasti Bhaktir Bhagavatya Kinchana Save Gunaish Tatra Samsate Suraha. All the good qualities of knowledge develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 8th verse, is essential. Even for one who takes to devotional service, it is most important. Transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. As for the knowledge outlined here, the items may be analyzed as follows. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others. But from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge who knows that he is not this body, anything, honor or dishonor, pertaining to this body is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently, sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group which is not actually following religious principles, and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he's progressing. He can judge by these items. Nonviolence is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body. But actually, nonviolence means not to put others into distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people so that they may become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is nonviolence. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. Even a boy like Prahlad, who only 5 years old was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, was endangered when his father became antagonistic to his devotion. The father tried to kill him in so many ways, but Prahlad tolerated him. So there may be many impediments to making advancement in spiritual knowledge, but we should be tolerant and continue our progress with determination. Simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth even to an enemy. As for acceptance of the spiritual master, that is essential, because without the instructions of a bona fide spiritual master, one cannot progress in the spiritual science. One should approach the spiritual master with all humility and offer him all services so that he will be pleased to bestow his blessings upon the disciple. Because a bona fide spiritual master is a representative of Krishna, if he bestows any blessings upon his disciple, that will make the disciple immediately advance without the disciples following the regulated principles. Or the regulated principles will be easier for one who has served the spiritual master without reservation. Cleanliness is essential for making advancement in spiritual life. There are two kinds of cleanliness, external and internal. External cleanliness means taking a bath, but for internal cleanliness, one has to think of Krishna and Krishna always and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. Steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. Without such determination, one cannot make tangible progress. And self-control means that one should accept anything which is one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of spiritual progress. One should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. The senses are so strong that they are always anxious to have some sense gratification. One should not cater to these demands, which are not necessary. The senses should only be gratified to keep the body fit so that one can discharge his duty in advancing in spiritual life. The most important and uncontrollable sense is the tongue. If one can control the tongue, then there's every possibility of controlling the other senses. The function of a tongue is to taste and to vibrate. Therefore, by systematic regulation, the tongue should always be engaged in tasting the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna. As far as the eyes are concerned, they should not be allowed to see anything but the beautiful form of Krishna. That will control the eyes. Similarly, The ears should be engaged in hearing about Krishna and the nose in smelling the flowers offered to Krishna. This is the process of devotional service. And it is understood that Bhagavad Gita is simply expounding the science of devotional service. Devotional service is the main and sole objective. Unintelligent commentators on the Bhagavad Gita try to divert the mind of the reader to other subjects, but there is no other subject in Bhagavad Gita than devotional service. False ego means accepting this body as oneself. When one understands that he is not his body and his spirit soul, he comes to his real ego. Ego is there. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. In the Vedic literature, Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 1.4.10, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am spirit. This I am, the sense of self, also exists in the liberated stage of self-realization. The sense of I am is ego, but when the sense of I am is applied to this false body, it is false ego. When the sense of self is applied to reality, that is real ego. There are some philosophers who say that we should give up our ego, but we cannot give up our ego because ego means identity. We ought, of course, to give up the false identification with the body. One should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age, and disease. There are descriptions in various Vedic literatures of birth. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, the child's stay in the womb of the mother, its suffering, etc., are all very graphically described. It should be thoroughly understood that birth is distressful. Because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of a mother, we do not make any solution to the repetition of birth and death. Similarly, at the time of death, there are all kinds of sufferings, and they are also mentioned in the authoritative scriptures. These should be discussed. And as far as disease and old age are concerned, everyone gets practical experience. No one wants to be diseased and no one wants to become old, but there is no avoiding these. Unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, and disease, there is no impetus for making our advancement in spiritual life. As for detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for these. They are the natural objects of affection. But when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Accept the remnants of foodstuff offered to Krishna, have some discussion on books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and engage oneself in deity worship. These four things will make one happy. One should train the members of the family in this way. Family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If one can mold his family life in such a way to develop Krishna consciousness following these four principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instructions of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world, one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress, so one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy. And when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in a spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 process of devotional service: chanting, hearing, worshiping, offering respect, etc., as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. That process should be followed. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic men. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he's inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Naturally, a devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema, going or enjoying some social function, because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. There are many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some subject, but according to Bhagavad Gita, such research work and philosophical speculations have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self. That is recommended here. As far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated that Bhakti Yoga is especially practical. As soon as there's a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between the supersoul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the supersoul cannot be one, at least not in the Bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. The service of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is eternal, nityam, as it is clearly stated. So bhakti or devotional service is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical conviction. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 11, this is explained. Parantita tattva vidas tattva yad jnanam advayam. Those who are actually knowers of the absolute truth know that the self is realized in 3 different phases, as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the last word in the realization of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to that platform of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus engage in the devotional service of the Lord. That is the perfection of knowledge. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the Supreme Truth, the Absolute Personality of Godhead, this process is just like a staircase beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now, on this staircase, there are so many people who have reached the first floor, the second, or the third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks I'm God because of ignorance. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amanitva, humility. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against the Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you for reading these verses, and especially this one, 8 through 12. It's very long, but I humbly request devotees to go back and read this 8 through 12. It's like the crux of the whole. Personally, I think for me, it's the crux of the whole Bhagavad Gita. And to really, as Srila Prabhupada said, beginning from practicing humility up to the point of self-realization. Thank you so much. Would like to ask devotees if any questions, any comments, any clarification, any points, please, do jump right in and do ask your question or share your points. While others are thinking, I have if you could that's a nice point from Shorab, where he said, I like the point of family chanting together at least once a day. That's such a nice point, Shorab. Absolutely. I was even thinking about that too. It's so nice, that if families can even go on a japa walk together or just sit together or just chant just once a day, Even if we do one round together, it's so powerful. Yes. Thank you for that nice point, Shora.
Okay.
Yeah, would you like to shed some light on that?
Chanting together, a family that chants together will stay together.
It's so true.
Uh,
Yeah, chant together, eat together, feast together, stay together, you know. Yeah, anything that a family does together, especially if it's spiritual activities. Thank you for the very nice point, Shorb. I really, really like that point too. Thank you. Any other takeaways from devotees? Any other thoughts, clarification? For me, one that in the beginning of this verse that really stood out for me was the process of knowledge. I had to write it down. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. Can you shed some light? It's so powerful yet really deep.
The process of knowledge terminates means ends with unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. Unalloyed devotional service to the Lord is our ticket to get out of the material world. When we understand that the material world is a place of suffering, and that all that we can do is try to mitigate the suffering a little bit, and we call that enjoyment. But it's not really enjoyment. There's no real enjoyment here. As a person is getting older and things are breaking down, as a person goes through one situation to another, that is challenging, you're going to realize that this world throws all kinds of things at you, and it is what is exactly described as jail. It is, in fact, jail. So you're going to expect really happiness in jail. So when we develop all of these qualities that the Lord has described as knowledge, and we go by that, and of course, we can only do that in association of devotees who've also read it and know that these qualities are real knowledge and they have to be developed and lived by. Then we begin to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead from our heart and seriously, and very, very seriously. And so from that serious commitment to service, then slowly we will kick out all of those things that get in the way of pure devotional service, serving, not expecting anything back, and serving with our hearts without any hesitation, giving all to the Lord, all of our efforts, seriously putting into serving the devotees, serving Guru, serving the Acha Vigraha, the deity of the Lord, because that's what we can see with our eyes now. So yes, the devotional service and unalloyed devotional service means that, pure devotional service, putting our hearts out to serve with body, mind, and words. Full devotional service, Chanamaya Swami explained it. Body, mind, and words. All of that's important to put into the service. Then we'll become happy. So the happiness, internal happiness is there, but it comes out more when we strive to serve devotionally without any kind of ulterior motive. The devotees of the Lord and the Lord himself. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for shedding some light on that, because that really was pretty powerful. And I think the term that Sri Prabhupada used, terminates in unalloyed, is what really caught my attention. Thank you so much for addressing that. Any other questions from devotees? Any thoughts? Any clarification? Any takeaways? And if there isn't, we thank you all for joining us, and thank you again and again. I humbly request devotees go back and read these verses and really meditate on each and every paragraph. It's very nice to have discussion with devotees, very nice to talk about these 4 verses or 5 from Sri Prabhupada, each and every of those qualities, we can't finish it all in one class like what we're doing right now, but it definitely takes several classes. So please do go back and read and discuss with the devotees. And we look forward to seeing all of you this Sunday at our Sunday program. Thank you so much for reading these verses. Until then, have a wonderful evening. Vanchakraptibhyascha Kripasindabevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Have a wonderful weekend. Haribol.
Hare Hare Krishna. Oh,
Hare Krishna. See you
Hare
soon.
Krishna. Yep, see you soon.